The evening began with a calm that felt planned, almost protected, as if the world outside had agreed to stay quiet just for them, and Emma noticed this the moment she stepped into the living room where Daniel had already set everything up, the couch neatly arranged, a simple movie paused on the opening screen, a bowl of popcorn on the table that smelled warm and familiar. And it all felt so normal that it almost hid the tension resting beneath it, because this was not just a movie night even. If neither of them said it out loud, it was another moment added to a long list of shared evenings that never crossed a line but always leaned close to one, and Emma took her seat carefully, leaving a small space between them that had become routine over the years, a distance that said friendship on the surface but held something deeper underneath, something quiet and patient and often painful. And as the movie started and the soft light of the screen filled the room, she tried to focus on the story playing out in front of her, but her mind kept drifting, catching on small details like the way Daniel leaned forward when something serious happened in the film, or the way he laughed quietly during the lighter scenes, and she wondered, as she often did, how someone could feel so close and so far at the same time, because they had history together, years of conversations, shared worries, and late-night talks that stretched longer than planned, but they both knew there were topics they avoided, feelings they never named, and tonight that awareness felt stronger, heavier, as if the air itself carried it, and Emma pulled the blanket over her legs not because she was cold but because she needed something to hold on to, something solid, while her thoughts moved faster than the movie, and she told herself this night was no different from the others, that she was overthinking again, that Daniel was just a friend who cared deeply and nothing more, yet her heart did not fully believe that, because her heart had learned to read between moments, and it noticed how Daniel's arm rested close enough that she could feel its warmth without touching, how neither of them moved away when their shoulders brushed, how the silence between lines of dialogue felt longer than usual, and as the film continued, Emma became aware of a strange feeling, a quiet pressure in her chest, not sadness exactly, but a sense that something important was near, something she could not see yet, and she glanced at the window where the curtains moved slightly as the wind passed outside, and the night beyond looked darker than before, the streetlights glowing softly, steady but distant, and she wondered if nights remembered things, if walls held memories, if moments like this stacked quietly inside a person until one small event caused them to fall, and then it happened without warning, without drama, without sound at first. The lights simply went out, the screen turning black, the room losing its soft glow in an instant, and Emma froze as darkness filled the space, not the peaceful kind but the sudden kind that made every sound sharper and every thought louder, and the movie stopped mid-scene, cutting off voices and music as if someone had closed a door, and for a second neither of them spoke, and in that pause Emma felt her breath catch because the darkness removed something important, the comfort of distraction, and now there was only the room, the silence, and Daniel sitting beside her, closer now in a way that felt undeniable. And she heard him shift slightly, felt the couch move, and her senses sharpened as if her body understood before her mind did that this moment mattered, and her heart beat faster, not from fear but from awareness, because when the lights went out, the world narrowed, and all the unspoken feelings that had lived safely in the background were suddenly standing in the center, waiting, and Emma realized that whatever happened next, this night, would no longer be just another calm movie night, because the darkness had arrived at the exact moment when everything they avoided was ready to be felt. The darkness settled around them like a heavy blanket, sudden and complete, and for a few seconds, neither Emma nor Daniel moved, their breathing the only sound breaking the silence, a rhythm that seemed louder than the normal hum of the city outside, and the absence of light made the room feel smaller, closer, as if it had shrunk just to hold them together, and Emma realized how aware she had become of every detail she had ignored before, the steady rise and fall of Daniel's chest, the soft brush of his arm against hers, the faint scent of his cologne that had always been comforting but now felt intimate in a way she hadn't admitted even to herself, and Daniel reached for his phone, the familiar glow that normally offered reassurance was gone, the battery low, leaving them stranded in the dark, and yet the lack of distraction made everything more intense, more meaningful, and he finally spoke, a quiet voice that did not attempt to fill the silence but acknowledged it. "Looks like the power's out," he said. And Emma nodded, her throat tight, her mind racing with thoughts she hadn't allowed before, the ordinary phrase somehow grounding yet strange, because everything ordinary had suddenly become fragile and sharp, and she found herself wanting to respond more fully, to speak her truth, but she swallowed it, choosing calm over confession, and for a moment they sat there. The dark a protective cover, the world outside paused, and Emma felt her pulse quicken with a strange mix of fear and anticipation, because the darkness seemed to encourage honesty, even if no words came, and she finally whispered, "This is kind of nice," surprising herself with the admission, and Daniel turned slightly toward her, curiosity evident even though she could only sense it. "Nice?" he asked softly, and she explained, "Quiet." Like the world paused for a second, and he smiled, a small, private smile that reached his eyes, and the darkness made it safe to notice details usually hidden, to feel the unspoken closeness they had always skirted around, and in that silence, Emma's heart became aware of how much she had missed, how much she longed for connection that went beyond friendship, how the years of careful distance now felt like walls she was ready to tear down, and Daniel's presence was no longer just comforting. It was magnetic, pulling her thoughts into places she hadn't dared to explore, and she wondered if he felt it too, the unspoken shift, the awareness of something tender and serious threading through the night, the soft pull of intimacy that wasn't physical yet was undeniable, and she realized that in the dark, everything they had kept hidden from each other became almost impossible to ignore, because the lack of light made the heart speak louder than words, and Emma's mind raced as she thought about how the ordinary comfort of friendship had slowly grown into something more, something delicate and thrilling, and she noticed how the air seemed thicker, how the small sounds, the creak of the couch, the rustle of the blanket, the faint hum of the city, carried weight, significance, as if the world was leaning in to listen, and she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature, a heat that came from proximity and shared history, and Daniel's voice broke into her thoughts again. Soft, tentative, yet full of something she couldn't quite name. "I know what you mean," he said, and in that simple response, a bridge formed, a connection that had been there for years but had never been acknowledged, and in the shadows, Emma felt the boundaries of their relationship blur just slightly, the years of careful friendship ready to bend into something new, something honest, because the dark had stripped away distractions, had made them present in a way that daylight never allowed. And every glance, every small movement seemed amplified, meaningful, charged with possibility, and she realized that the movie, the popcorn, the routine of the night no longer mattered, because they were no longer just watching a story on a screen, they were living one of their own, a story built on quiet tension, longing, and unspoken desire, and the world outside might have continued its steady rhythm, but inside, in the dark, time slowed, awareness sharpened, and Emma felt a fragile thrill, a sense that something was about to change, something delicate and important, and she wondered, for the first time in years, if Daniel felt the same pull, the same unacknowledged hope, the same yearning for a step toward each other, and the room seemed to hold its breath along with her, the darkness a canvas for their emotions, allowing them to exist safely, without words, without action, without expectation, and yet every second stretched into eternity, full of tension and quiet promise, because in that darkness, the space between them shrank, and Emma felt closer to him than ever, a closeness that went beyond physical presence, deeper into memory, into longing, into the careful attention of hearts aware of each other, and she realized she didn't want the lights to return, not yet, because the darkness had uncovered feelings that might never surface in ordinary circumstances, feelings that spoke of hope, of possibility, of love waiting quietly beneath years of friendship, and as they both sat there, breathing together in silence, the night seemed alive with potential, and Emma understood, in a way that words could never capture, that this unplanned moment, this sudden blackout, had shifted everything, had drawn out emotions they had carried alone for too long, and in that quiet, in that darkness, they were no longer just friends, they were two people standing on the edge of something new, something tender and unknown, and the heart, once cautious and reserved, now beat in anticipation of the next move, the next word, the next unspoken truth waiting to be revealed. The minutes in the dark stretched long and strange, filled with unspoken words that hovered between Emma and Daniel like fragile glass, and every small sound, the soft creak of the couch, the rustle of the blanket, even the distant hum of the city outside, seemed charged with meaning as if the room itself were holding its breath. And then Daniel's voice broke the tension, low and careful, almost hesitant. "Emma, can I ask you something?" And her heart skipped, a mixture of excitement and fear stirring as she replied softly, "Okay," unsure what he might say. yet bracing herself for it, because even a small question now felt heavy with potential, and he leaned slightly closer in the shadows, though she could only sense it, the dark making proximity feel intimate without crossing boundaries, and his words came slowly, each one deliberate. Have you ever felt like you missed the right moment with someone? And her chest tightened because she knew exactly what he meant, though she hadn't expected him to voice it, and she admitted in a quiet voice, almost trembling, yes, more than once, her eyes adjusting to the darkness but focused inward on the rush of emotions that always came with his honesty, and he remained still for a moment, letting her answer settle between them, then continued, I keep thinking about that lately, his tone carrying a weight she could feel more than hear, and Emma realized that this night, the blackout, had peeled back the layers they had wrapped around themselves for years, leaving only raw, honest connection. And in that stillness, she felt a surge of longing, a wish to close the gap, to reach out, to finally name what she had carried quietly in her heart for so long, but she held back, afraid of risking the fragile trust and comfort that had defined their friendship, and yet the words themselves, spoken aloud, changed everything, creating an invisible bridge between them, a delicate line of acknowledgement that their relationship had shifted, that feelings once hidden were now allowed to exist, even if only in silence, and the dark made it possible to notice the subtle signals, the slight catch in his breath, the way his hand rested closer to hers than it needed to, the warmth that emanated from his presence, subtle but undeniable, and Emma's mind raced as she thought of all the moments they had shared, all the quiet glances, the lingering laughter, the late-night talks that had shaped them both, and she understood now that those years had been preparation, that the foundation of friendship had been necessary to hold the weight of what was now possible, and when she whispered, what about you? Do you think it's ever too late? She felt the vulnerability in her own voice, the soft tremor betraying the hope and fear coiled together in her chest, and Daniel's response was slow, deliberate, carrying the honesty that always drew her in, I hope not, and even in those 3 words, she felt a world of meaning, a promise, a possibility, and in the dark, the room seemed to shrink further, enclosing them in a bubble where time lost its ordinary rhythm, where years of careful restraint could no longer hold the tide of feeling that had built quietly but steadily, and Emma's thoughts tumbled over each other, recalling every small gesture that had once seemed ordinary but now revealed itself as intimate, meaningful, a secret language of affection neither had named but both had understood, and in that charged silence that followed, the air itself seemed heavier, electric with tension, full of the unspoken confession hovering on the edge of words, and she realized that fear and hope were dancing together, each heartbeat amplified, each breath a signal of longing and restraint, and she wanted to speak, to tell him everything at once, but she knew words might not capture the fragile perfection of the moment, might tip the balance and break what was forming, so she stayed quiet, letting him feel the weight of her presence, letting the dark allow them to exist in this suspended reality, and Daniel's breathing shifted slightly, a sign of awareness, of anticipation, and in the space between them, Emma felt a pulse of connection, a deep recognition that they were standing on the edge of something beautiful and dangerous, something tender that required courage to explore, and the darkness had stripped away all distractions, all the usual barriers of light and sight, leaving only honesty, emotion, and possibility, and she noticed how each small gesture, his hand brushing against the blanket, the tilt of his head, the soft exhale between words, spoke louder than anything spoken aloud, communicating years of shared memory, affection, longing, and unspoken desire, and she felt the rush of understanding that they were no longer just friends in a routine, no longer merely occupying the same space, but participants in a delicate moment of recognition, a quiet awakening of feelings that had existed for too long in shadow, waiting, patient, and in that moment, she wished the blackout would last forever, that the world outside would disappear, leaving only this room. This closeness, this awareness, and she felt the thrill of danger, not in anything physical, but in the emotional risk of admitting to herself that her heart had wanted this for years, that it wanted him in a way that could not be undone, and Daniel's voice, when he spoke again, was soft, low, yet certain, I hope not, echoing in the darkness, resonating with everything she had ever felt but never voiced, and in those words, she found both reassurance and a spark of courage, the spark that might finally allow them to step forward together, and as they sat in that stillness, In the blackout that had stolen the ordinary distractions and given them raw awareness, Emma understood that time had shifted, that the night had changed them, that the moment was theirs alone, fragile and brilliant, a turning point invisible to the outside world, yet monumental in the quiet landscape of their hearts, and she felt the delicate thrill of possibility, the ache of longing, the sweetness of hope, and the fear of what might happen next, knowing that the story of them had entered a new chapter, one filled with uncertainty, emotion, and the quiet promise that the dark had awakened something neither of them could ignore, something tender, emotional, and deeply human, the kind of feeling that could shape the rest of their lives if only they had the courage to let it. The lights returned slowly, flickering first like shy stars before settling into steady brightness, and Emma felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment as the darkness that had held them so close vanished, leaving the room ordinary again, the TV blinking back to life with its paused movie reminding them of the world outside their bubble, and for a moment, both of them stayed still, caught in the tension of everything that had been said and felt in the blackout, realizing that the quiet intimacy they had shared could not be undone even though the light exposed them to normalcy once more. And Daniel turned to her, his eyes meeting hers fully for the first time that night, the distance on the couch unchanged but the invisible lines between them altered, more present, more charged, and in that look, Emma saw the reflection of her own hope, a delicate acknowledgement that the night had shifted something inside them, something tender and permanent, and he spoke softly, almost as if testing the waters. "I'm glad the power went out," and she smiled, her lips curving with a quiet joy that carried both humor and relief. "Me too," she admitted, feeling the truth of it settle in her chest, and the movie no longer mattered, the popcorn long forgotten, because the night had given them something greater, a moment of honesty, of emotional exposure, of a connection that neither could ignore, and although they did not move closer, did not reach for each other, the space between them no longer felt like a boundary but a line waiting to be crossed at the right time, a line now softened by understanding and mutual awareness, and the rhythm of their hearts spoke louder than words, each beat a subtle acknowledgement of the tension, the longing, the hope that had been awakened in the darkness. And when Daniel finally stood to leave, he moved with a careful hesitation, a small pause at the door that felt heavier than any simple farewell, and Emma felt the pull of unspoken words, the ache of almost said confessions hovering in the air, and he looked back, eyes lingering, a smile faint but real, and said, "Next time we finish the movie," his voice carrying a promise, a suggestion that the night was not over, that what had begun in the dark could continue in the light, and Emma nodded, her heart full, a mix of excitement and nervousness. "Next time," she echoed, and when the door closed, the sound was louder than it should have been, a punctuation on the night's quiet revelations, and the room, now fully lit, felt ordinary but carried the weight of everything that had happened in the blackout, a memory they both shared but had not fully spoken of. A moment that would linger, gentle and insistent, in Emma's mind, making her heart beat faster in ways she could not entirely name, because the darkness had removed barriers, had allowed honesty, had made the subtle emotions they had long hidden impossible to ignore, and she realized that the lights returning did not erase the shift inside them, that the connection was no longer something hidden but something alive, a soft, persistent presence, waiting for the right moment to grow, and the quiet after Daniel left was filled with reflection, anticipation, and the bittersweet ache of emotions newly awakened, the kind that could change everything without a single word, and she walked back to the couch, the blanket still around her shoulders, and felt the room differently, warmer, more intimate, charged with the memory of closeness that had been brief but monumental, and she understood that the blackout, the sudden darkness, had been a gift, a chance to see each other, to feel each other, without distractions, without fear, and that the real story of the night was not the movie, not the popcorn, not the simple routine they had planned, but the soft, emotional awakening that had occurred in the shadows, a revelation that they both carried, quietly and carefully, now waiting for the next step, the next glance, the next moment that might finally let them cross the line from unspoken longing into something tangible. And Emma smiled softly to herself, feeling the bittersweet mix of hope and patience, realizing that love had quietly entered their lives in a single night, in a single shared darkness, and that its presence would linger, gentle yet insistent, shaping the way she would see Daniel from now on. And the night, though over, had changed everything, leaving her with a quiet certainty that some moments, no matter how fleeting, could never be forgotten, and that the calm movie night, once ordinary, had become a turning point, a tender, emotional memory that promised more, and she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the lights or the room, a warmth that came from recognition, possibility, and the soft hope that some things, once felt, could never be undone.